Hello learners, today we are going to study about square roots under the topic of squares and square roots. So, a square root is obtained when a number is expressed as a product of its prime factors. For example, you can be asked to obtain the square root of 144. To obtain the square root, you should express the number as a product of its prime factors. For example, 144 divided by 2 is 72. 72 divided by 2 is 36. 36 divided by 2 is 18. 18 divided by 2 is 9. 9 can only be divided by 3 to get 3. And 3 can be divided by 3 to get 1. So it becomes 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. You obtain these numbers on this side and you multiply them. So you take two numbers as a pair. From these numbers, you take one number from each. So 2 from this one, and 2 from this one, and 3 from this one. When you multiply all of them, it becomes 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 3 is 12. So 12 is our answer as the square root of 144. Let's try another example. You can be asked, and the symbol for the square root looks like this. This is the symbol for the square root. You can also be asked to get the square root of 625. So you express it as a product of its prime factors using the tree method. This can be divided by 5 because it ends with 5. This we divided it with 2 because it had an even number at the end. So this number which is divisible by 5 ends with 5 or 0. That is why we divided it by 5. So 625 divided by 5, you get 125. 125 divided by 5, you get 25. And then 25 divided by 5, you get 5. And then 5 divided by 5, you get 1. So you write the numbers on this side and take each number from the pair. So the numbers are 5 times 5, that is the first pair, and the other pair is 5 times 5. You take one number from each pair, so it is 5 and the other number is 5. So it becomes 5 times 5, 25. That is the square root of 625. That is how you work out the square root, especially for whole numbers. Let's try out the square root of fractions. To work out the square root of fractions, work out the square root of the numerator and the denominator separately. For example, you can be asked to get the square root of a fraction which is 25 over 81. So you work out the square root of the 25, which is the numerator, and 81, which is the denominator, and then you write it as a fraction. For example, let us start with 25. The square root, that is a symbol, and that is the symbol for the square root. So the square root of 25, after expressing 25 as a product of its prime factors, it is divisible by 5, so it is 25 divided by 5 is 5, and then 5 divided by 5 is 1. So 5 times 5 is pair by itself, so one number is 5. So the square root is 5. And then we get the square root of 81. So to get the square root of 81, 81 can only be divided by, which is the easiest number? It is 9. To get 9. 9 divided by 9 to get 1. So we have 9 times 9. You take 9 as the sole number. So 9 is the answer for the square root. So you write the number. What was the square root for 25? It was 5. So the answer becomes 5 over the square root for 81 is 9. So it becomes 5 over 9. So that is our answer. Let's try question 4. What is the square root of 3 whole 1 over 16? To get the square root, we convert it into improper fraction. So it is 3 whole 1 over 16. 3 whole 1 over 16. To convert it into improper fraction, we multiply 3 times 16 to get 48. And then you add the 1 to get 49. So it becomes 49 over 16. 3 times 16 is 48 plus 1, 49. 49 becomes the numerator and 16 remains the denominator. And then you find the square root. First with the numerator, you start with the numerator and then the denominator. So the square root for the numerator, we get 7 times 7 is 49. So you write 7 there and the other 7. 7 can be divided by 7 to get 1. So you get 7 as the answer for the square root of 49. And we have 16. The square root of 16. 16 by 2, 8 by 2, 4 by 2, 2 by 2, 1. So we have 2 times 4. We have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So we have 2 pairs of 2. You take 2 times 2 to get 4. So the answer for the square root of 16 is 4. So it becomes 7, which is the square root for 49, and the square root for 16 is 4. So it becomes 7 over 4. And then you convert it into proper fraction by dividing 7 over 4. So you get 1 remainder 3, 1 remainder 3, and you put 4, which was the denominator. That is how we work on square root of fractions. Let's work out of square root of decimals. For example, you can be asked to get the square root of 2.25. To get the square root, first of all, there is one method you can remove the decimal point by multiplying by the number of zeros which are replaced by the number ahead of the decimal point. For example, you have 1, 2, two numbers ahead of the decimal point. So it becomes 225 divided by, we have two numbers, so you replace them by zeros. And then you find the square root. So the square root of 225 and the square root of 100. The square root of 225 divide by 5 to get 25. No, it is 45. 45 divide by 5 to get 9. 9 can be divided by 3 to get 3. Divide by 3 to get 1. So it is a pair of 5 and 5, and a pair of 3 and 3. You take one number from each, you get 5 from here and 3 from here. 5 times 3 is 15. So 15 is the answer for the square root of 225. And then you get the square root of 100. 100 you can be divided by 10 to get 10. 10 divided by 10 to get 1. So from 10 times 10 we have one number which is 10. So 10 is the number for the square root. So it becomes 15, which is the square root for 225, and 10, which is the square root of 100. 15 divided by 10, writing it in decimal point, you get 1.5. Because we have 1 0, you carry it over here and you put the decimal point between 1 and 5. So it becomes 1.5 as our answer. Learners, you can try the following. You have question 1, 2, and 3 and 4. You can try it on yourself. And if you find any challenge, you can ask on the comment section. Bye bye learners, that is the end of our lesson.